how did the Norse and the Anglo-Saxons stop their helmets, their swords, axes, spears and knives from getting rusty? And I love that idea. How did we, and how do we today, stop our gear from rusting up? Because let's face it, you go away all summer battling, it comes to winter and you throw your kit in the garage and you don't think nothing about it, and then March comes along, it's getting nice outside, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to get back into training, go to some events, but you go and get your helmet and you find, oh, it's all rusty, because that can happen so quickly, especially with the UK climate. So first of all, I'm going to answer the modern question, how do I prevent my kit from getting rusty? And then I'm going to talk about it at the end, how did the Norse and the Saxons prevent their swords and chainmail, their helmets, their saxes, their axes and spears from rusting. So this comes from a comment from the other day from one of my subscribers, and it is Lay Corsair QH1GI, who says, what's the best way to prevent rust occurring on axes and swords? Which oil do you recommend? Well, thank you very much for the lovely comment. I have answered the comment already, but I thought that this deserves a video, because we always think about weapons, but we don't often think about how do we maintain them, because it's very easy for a Sagas to get rusty. It is very easy for a helmet to do the same, and in fact you will see a slight bit of rust on this helmet, and I need to treat it and make sure that it doesn't get any worse. So in this video I'm going to demonstrate the modern way of how I do it, and then finish talking about how within the historical sources and the contents that we know about when it comes to Anglo-Saxons and the Norse and how they prevented rust. There has been some very fascinating experimental archaeology on this, but because we don't have written accounts and because we don't have manuals from the Norse and the Vikings on looking after your kit, a lot of this is experimental archaeology, which is a fascinating subject on its own. And without reenactment groups experimenting, without trying different things, we wouldn't have the information we have today. But we're always learning, we're always discovering new things, we're always trying new things. And I've tried a few things over the years, and at some point in the channel's future we would look to make some authentic oil and some sort of a concoction to prevent rust. So on my lap I have one of my Viking helms, which I don't wear very often, and I really must do on the camera some more because it's an excellent helmet, but in places it's got a little bit of rust. Luckily, because it's been darkened through the process of heat, it doesn't take rust so easily. The darkness is one of the many ways they would prevent rust. But every now and again I have to manage and look after my kit, my Norse and Saxon gear. So what I have here is some spray. Now you could use WD-40, one of the best oils about. In this case I'm using GT85. It's not an advert for them, it's just what I've got in my house. So the first thing I would do, now there's two trains of thought on this. Some say you should spray the helmet and some say you should spray the cloth. Personally myself, I like to put a little bit of spray on the helmet and then put a little bit on the cloth and then wipe it in and wipe it around. And you can already see the difference, it's already becoming a little bit more shiny, and this helps. And we'll put a little bit more on, because every bit you do, and especially where you do see rust developing, it will prevent it from rusting even further. So I give it a good coating, but I also go in the inside and give the inside a little bit of a coating too, because the inside is often neglected and will often get quite rusty. So I will go in the helmet, and I'm just using the old cloth which I've got. Now you could use wool if you want to be authentic, or linen. I've just got an old golf cloth, and I just wipe it on the inside, and I also make sure that I put a little bit on the face guard as well, And then the last thing I do is I'll put it in my hand and I'll just give the mail a slight coating, being careful not to put too much on my sleeve. And that is how I manage and look after my helmets. Now doing that a couple of times a year is great. And then I like to give it a polish, so let's just find my cloth and just give it a bit more. And that's nice. So that's my helmet. You can't polish your helmet enough, but you have to do it with your knives as well. So again, I put a little bit on my knife and then I just wipe it away. And if you do get rust, I will sand it down with some very fine sandpaper. We know back in the medieval times they had the ability to make sandpaper, and I'd really love to have a go at this. Get some sand, grind it really fine into a fine grit, and get a piece of rectangular leather and make some natural glue and bond it in. So this is being nicely oiled. I don't need to treat the handle. If I wanted to put something on the handle, I'll probably put something, you know, like for leather, as I sometimes put on the bone. But the bone often keeps moist because of the amount of times you use it in your hand, because your hands are greasy. So that's my knife done. I then have my Langsax. Now this Langsax does have a little bit of rust here and a few fingerprints. It could do with a bit of a very fine sanding down again, but I don't often like to do that. So again, I'm going to spray my Langsax, but I'm not going to wipe it first of all. The first thing I'm going to do is put it back in my sheath and then just rub my sheath so that a little bit of the oil goes onto my sheath and on the inside. Now the best way when you make a sheath is to have some wool or some felt on the inside, but in this case it's just leather. And then I'll just give it a wipe like this. We'll put it away. And then one of the things that often get rusty is shields. So again, I'll just go round the boss. We'll give that a wipe. And then we'll just go on the outside, the inside of the shield. I'm just going to spray the bar. And just put a little bit of oil on the bar as well. Now, that's those bit of kit. My knife, my helmet and my Langsax oiled, and that will stay oily and nice and greasy for quite a few months. So it is important that you manage your kit correctly. But let's talk about how did we manage it back in the day. So 1,000 years ago, or 1200, going back to the Iron Age when iron first got used in history, they learnt the ability to collect the fats from the process of butchering, because if you're butchering a cow, maybe a deer, maybe a pig, there's a lot of fat, and they would know also that they could incorporate a little bit of beeswax within that material to make a kind of a substance which they could then cover your swords and your axes and your shields. And you could just fundamentally use animal fats. I think at some point when I get a nice piece of beef and I've got some spare fat, I'm going to cut it off, and then I'm going to do a little bit of research and make this on camera and show you how you could make an authentic balm to cut and cover over your swords. And what they would also do, you know, when you got to the winter time, when you're most probably staying in your longhouse for longer periods, they would cover their weapons with them and then just leave them be. Because trust me, I've left an axe and a sword in the garage over 3 or 4 months and it starts to get rusty, and that's the last thing you want to do. So it's about being clever, and I would love to know if you've got any methods of making, or know any instructions and ingredients you use to make an authentic fat for covering your metal, because I think that will be quite fascinating to do. And I know many years ago when my dad was alive, he showed me how to get beeswax and make a protector for your leather, and I cannot for the God to remember how you do it. And my dad was a beekeeper and kept bees for many years, So wax was one of those ingredients which you could incorporate into your fat because it will make it a little bit more solid. But because we don't have the written evidence, because the Norse and the Saxons, and let alone the other cultures of Europe, like the Visigoths or the Franks, because they didn't have a massive source of writing and not everybody could write, these sort of things do not get written down. It's quite interesting. The other day I was reading about how you make crucible steel, and there are written accounts from the 8th and 9th century that were translated in the 12th century about how you would make crucible steel. But you would not be using those manuscripts if you was, for instance, making crucible steel. There was more of a reference for the better educated man. And most educated people in those days were a part of the church. So I think it's a fascinating thing. But I'd love to know, how do you manage your swords? How do you keep them from rusting? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and do check out our latest video. It's goodbye from me on a wet day, and I must go in now before my camera gets too wet. Curse the gods, it's Loki's fault again. Bloody Loki.